Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Kame House lobby with the 2MK team. Today is going to be a little bit more focused than our usual streams because we have a specific purpose in mind today. This is a loser stays on US East Coast 2 lobby ring match priority lobby 02. You can join us with the passcode 2717. You're looking for the red hit outside Kame House.
Get ready. Fight it out.
Today we are looking at the effects of the training from our various bots, or rather our bot with various settings. Now obviously we haven't had that much time to train, but there's been the testing phase and certain players in the team have had more options with it than others. Therefore, our results are going to be based on what bot settings the player tested and what their intention was as a whole.
残らず怒り手は解散ぞ。こんなものか。そろそろ死にたいだろ。そこしまった。まだまだ。今すぐ黙らせてやるぞ。ほらそら。目だ。虫けこの雑魚どもめ。
Rune Siren's training has been mostly against the form of the bot we intend to release tomorrow.
その痛み決して忘れるな。
And a little bit against some of the others for the purposes of testing, of course. As main bot developer, mine has been all over the place, but a lot more observation than playing. And by contrast, OmniRabbit has not had much, if any, time with the bot at all.
Brace yourself for the coming battle.
Now, it normally takes relatively long to see results in terms of physical ability for difficult things, but mindset changes can happen after just an hour or two with the bot.
Are you ready?
As they're mostly meant to improve your focus and the concept of how you want to play the game.
ちょっと脅してやるか。ちょっと脅していいぜ野郎。これならどうだ。終わりだ。くらえ。甘い。覚悟はいいか。本気でいくぞ。どうした。どうした。覚悟はいいか。点数をつけるとすれば30点台だ。こんなものか。お前ここを見ている。そこですか。あら、いや。どうだい。見えたよ。そこだ。ほらそら。ちょっと脅してみよう。その調子。ほらそら。そこですか。これならどうだ。こう見えても僕は優しいね。こっちだよ。どうだい。その調子。そろそろ死にたいだろう。そこでここですよ。虫けら生意気だ。うるさいね。宇宙の塵にしてやる。覚悟はいいか。死になるか。フリーザ。なめんなよ。無駄だ。こう見えても僕は優しい。なめるなよ。生意気だよお前。バカな。そろそろ死にたいだろ。さあ間に合って。ここは お待たせしますよ。くそ覚悟はいいか。やるな。俺は任せたぞ。気をつけて。つながりどうだ。甘いですよ。貴様の相手はこの僕だ。この星もろとも貴様の勝ちだ。そろそろ死にたいだろ。そろそろ死にたいだろ。ちだ。中途半端な力を身につけた者は
Watching where your opponent chooses to go becomes easier when you've gotten more practice against the sort of opponent that a bot gives. They have a set number of options, even though our Dragon Ball FighterZ bot tends to show off more options than you'd expect, probably because it has 8 actions to choose from in many situations. You still overall get the feeling that things that come at the beginning have a certain follow-up or a certain set of follow-ups that you can get used to.
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess.
So in Rinsaren's case, having learned to keep her characters in the air and target the opponent more effectively from there, as that is our goal for tomorrow's bot release,
Are you ready?
it's easier to stay calm in particular situations and watch the opponent and recognize what's going on. Furthermore, it is easier to see when the opponent has violated an expectation you had and judge what to do from there with it. From the other side, you can also see which aspects have not been picked up on as yet due to not training with the bot intended to help. As always, we left the defensive reactions and the training related to those to Amara. And during her testing, Rinsaren did basically point out that defense is still functionally, even against the bot, too stressful to easily do. In other words, she spent her time working on accuracy and targeting in certain situations and after others. And had a little less luck with the defense and opening up forms of the bot. Similarly, she only managed somewhat well against the unconventional movement style that Trunks and Krillin sort of fit into. However, in all of that, she did end up learning a lot of evasive and flowing ways to deal with things using Vegeta Blue, meaning that he is now able to help quote-unquote stall much better than before. Having watched her train, I can also point out that a particular intended aspect of it she hasn't quite picked up yet. Specifically, the ability to recognize it's time to call in another character as an assist when the opponent is going under. So, it's fairly easy to, from there, decide I'm going to train on it, and that's what I'm going to do with it this time. However, general overall calm and decision making has improved in the expected places and not improved in the places that were noted to probably not be improvements. However, she does seem to have gotten over that tiresome dropping of particular things that Vegeta Blue does. Which leads to this sort of situation improving. In short, it's likely to be much harder to get away from her strikes now, without also effectively letting Vegeta Blue get away himself, as you'll have to commit to some fairly large movement in order to achieve the job. The height and speed at which those characters move also makes it difficult to use basic methods of effectively hitting or bringing them down. Meaning that characters without diagonal upward attacks or with the more standard spacings of crouch heavy, such as mine, have to work a little harder now to actually lock her down or make sure to keep the momentum overall. Now, I'm not going to exploit the fact that I know that it's unlikely I'll face assists coming in from there. In fact, I'll try something else. Last time I did not use 18 at all to deal with the situation. But she does have some good ways, obviously, because she can just call her brother and resolve it that way. But even then, the additional awareness helped quite a lot with this. However, it does become much easier to outmaneuver Frieza, in particular.
こですか。どうした。生意気だよ。なかなか絶対に許さんぞ。その程度でその調子。こっちだ。どうした。行くぞ。気をつけろ。終わりだ。なんだと。ここは任せたぞ。そろそろ死にたいだろ。ちょっと脅してやるか。甘いですよ。後悔しますよ。調子に乗るな。甘いですよ。そろそろこの星もろとも貴様のお耳にしてやる。こんなものか。今度は本気でやらせてもらうぞ。今度は本気でやらせてもらうぞ。その鬱陶しい口を黙らせて。17号なんだ。やっそらそら感謝なんかしてないからな。ここですよ。調子に乗るな。しまった。宇宙の塵今度は俺が相手だ。終わりだ。点数をつけるとすれば30点ってところだ。早く勝負をつけなきゃね。どこ見てんのさ。逃げたく逃げてもいいよ。なるほど、簡単にはいかんぞ。やっ17号行くよ17号。分かった分かった。
And of course, when your opponents improve, you have to do some work yourself to keep up.
Showdown is about to begin!
From my side, the next level to pick up from training with the bot is most likely going to be what to do in a specific situation in defense, as none of my characters actually have, as mentioned, a strong way of dealing with that when the opponent is deflected out.
Get ready! Fight!
The other thing to work on is, of course, setups and not necessarily meaty attacks, but violating the opponent's expectations on wake-ups.
終わりだ。行くぞ。やるな。終わりだ。覚悟はいいか。終わりだ。クリリンさん。アカウント散歩。なんて力だ。この星もろとも。なんて力だ。ゴミにしてやる。やるな。なるほど。俺が負けるか。虫けらが。やるですって。しまった。そこか。頼みました。宇宙の塵にしてやる。クリリンさん。あら、生意気だよ、お前。あら、生意気だよ、お前。貴様の相手はこの僕だ。あら、後悔しますよ。ちょっと本気を出しますよ。どうだい？どうした？そこ。軽いね。身の程知らずやってやるか。だから行くよ17号。分かった。やがって。黙ってな。クリリンの技だよ。いっぱい。クリリンの技だよ。せいや。せいや。バカな。くらえ。せいや。なんの。おのれ。なんの。僕は優しい。修行の成果を見せて宇宙の塵にしてやる。ここですよ。なんだ。軽いね。惜しかったな。まだまだ。どうだ。逃がさないぞ。俺なかなかの。だから時な。やばい。そらもっと楽しもう。そら行くよ17号。分かった。じゃあね。バイ。17号。いや逃げてもいいよ。俺はそう簡単にはいかん。まだそら行くぞ。やがって捕らえた。行くぞ。驚いたよ。あんたの力が見たいわ。なんの。覚悟はいいか。よっと。終わりだ。参った。全力で行くぞ。甘い。せい。ここは任せた。まだ。よっ。マッサイヤーの要領で。行くぞ。ご飯。フリーザ。覚悟はいいか。アカウント散歩。この程度。もうここまでだ。ほら宇宙の塵にしてやる。やつならどうだ。やっ。その程度ですか。その調子。くらえ。終わりだ。どうした。まずい。強くなったな、ご飯。
Overall, however, you can generally see whatever ships I have because I'm quite often a player who adapts to the level of strength of the opponent and mirrors them quite a lot. So any changes you see on one side will usually change my mindset as well.
A fierce showdown is about to begin! Get ready! Fight!
Even though OmniRabbit has not had a lot of time with the actual bot, understanding the spacings at which to deflect has been improving because of just general experiments during testing with it. Trunks is a character who can, not necessarily safely, but who can do things off his deflect, making it more meaningful to have the playstyle that allows for this. He has therefore been working on his effectively tanking so that it's not possible to easily defeat his team due to Krillin's senzu. We don't yet have the form of the bot intended to help him train, as what he needs to train is a lot more about awareness of when to switch and use health and meter. And there is not as yet a meter watching version of it. This is actually partially because the meter watching version of this bot we created has a lot more to do with your matchup versus particular types of character because of which aspects of their meter are problematic. For example, in a matchup with Team Gohan, one generally expects to take a lot of damage and therefore should just view the enemy's meter as how much health you can afford to go in on. And when you have to hang back or heal or switch out, even though you normally would not want to give up such an advantage. This is due to the character's strong ability to push you from, say, about half life to dead with up to 5 meters. 4 can do it too, depending on where he starts. Similarly, all his work on his crouch heavy and stand heavy are also likely to end up helping in the same way. This is particularly strong with adult Gohan, who can get to play neutral at high levels and keep up some relatively complex zoning, which is what he was working on in previous rounds. So you can get some benefit out of just using the form of the bot that's intended to work on targeting the opponent in certain situations. I think it fell short. Nope. Similarly, understanding how one must use one's ether most effectively to save yourself in certain bad situations is a high requirement for this character.
Shinhan, win!
お前と手合わせできたこと武道家として誇りに思う。
Brace yourself for the coming battle! Get ready! Let's go!
Gohan's strong jumping heavy attack also helps in this because you can use it to shift the opponent's mindset when he's coming in through the air. Giving him a stronger mix-up with aerial use of his elbow. You can also use this sort of thing to work out styles and transitions by noting what is theoretically effective when you face a boss. Similarly, after training properly with our bot, It's easier to have a clear idea in your mind of where your strengths and weaknesses are. If you really want to try to win a match, it's obvious that you should try to rely on whatever your strengths are, and just expect to take damage for whatever causes damage in your weaknesses. Force the sparking. But overall, higher control in the air with Vegeta Blue and the ability to track the opponent's mindset even if you didn't initially understand it means a lot in this game.
Get ready for battle!
One of the other things that bots will have trouble teaching you, especially the one we have now, which takes a lot of actions, although I am working on a way to make that work, is neutral. And neutral is a matter of understanding when you can hit certain buttons because the opponent is going to approach, and when you have to whiff certain buttons to keep them in particular spaces. But this of course also relies on you understanding your opponent's options and ranges to a level that really just comes up in a different setting altogether. So it's easier functionally to zone with Frieza than to play any form of neutral against this team, given that their ranges are usually just outside of that which my own team uses. Even when it isn't, Frieza is still the better option for just playing neutral. As it can wear down the opponent and force them to do a lot of things they did not otherwise plan. In other words, overall, Frieza is able to be evasive and trick the opponent's mental state a lot more easily than other characters. But the team is also able to play neutral in particular ways that are hard for others to keep up with if they want to keep her out altogether. Forcing them to come in at her with a timing that can eventually be learned.
ちょっとしてやるか。今すぐ黙らせてやるぞ。なんのそろそろ本気を出しましょう。
Of course, as always, my aim is to get in on my extremely defensive opponent, so it's more or less throwing the match, unfortunately. However, there are some upsides to this, namely that if you start with that order, eventually the opponent will get into a mindset of blocking and keeping the opponent out, and their rhythm will change to the point where Piccolo can grab them consistently. Missed it. Being able to grind all at once without having any change in your opponent is also super important for a lot of things. And while you could achieve this by having a long set with a single person, the issue with this is that single people have differences in how they want to approach things based on how they're feeling at the time. Whereas our bot will basically be the same, in other words, whatever you set it to, for the entire time, giving you much more time to practice specific responses and specific mindsets.
Get ready. Fight it
This in turn will simply allow you to be less frantic and more able to react in certain situations just by being calmer as a whole. This additional calm is required to recognize situations in which certain opportunities are open to you.
おっといいぞ何がなる真面目にやるとするかはっ行くぞいいか来てくれやるなおっとやるじゃないかこれで終わりだこの程度か
As it often tends to, this will improve your defense more than it will your offense, simply because you will spend less time feeling as if you are out of control of a situation. Very strong, legit offense, as people like to call it, from the opponent will be about the same, but the more suspicious stuff will most likely fail more often. The additional defensive setup and speed that it grants the player means it's much harder for anyone whatsoever to break them down.
Krillin, win!
ああ見えていくつも死闘を繰り広げてきたんだ。舐めてもらっちゃ困るぜ。
Brace yourself for the coming battle!
Fortunately for Dragon Ball FighterZ bot, if you have unfamiliar characters but you want to work on the same thing, for the most part, you can switch to the characters in question just to see what options they have, as the bot is very likely to use them, regardless of whether or not it's a good idea to use them. Now, it's better if you can recognize which is which does take some time. But as an overall flow, simply going, I don't know what to do against this character, they're new, or my friend or opponent has a lot more than I expect. Just changing to those characters to see what happens can be a strong help in recognizing your positive and negative situations. Once you have this information, you can start to build up a game plan against the character in the basic sense. Are you going to try to zone them? Do you want your character with your long normals? Are you safe in the air? Are you safe on the ground? And so on. Is that targeted Gohan heavy? Ooh, no makeup sparkle.
任せだぞ皆さん行くぞいいぞだ行くぞ食らえ
Creative uses of your own meter and uses of tools you were using before, but using too much or at incorrect spaces or times. Well, usually one's a result of the other. Can help you pick up new strategies, regardless of if the characters in question are the optimal ones or not. Therefore, a lot of the time you can treat the thought as something in terms of guidelines to how to approach a problem. We will have given you what we consider to be the optimal team for working on that particular thing, i.e. to make it as hard as possible. But sometimes what you want is information and not difficulty. Once we've got all that down, as we've always mentioned, then it's time for combos. Because you have a much higher understanding of which confirms you're using and out of what situation. So, while we're still not expecting a whole lot in terms of managing to open up a defensive opponent or defend against a skilled attacking one from Rune Siren's current flow, the air awareness should have improved to the point where she should no longer feel so stressed in most matches.
Get ready for battle!
Since both the Learn to Defend team and the Learn to Target team contain at least one or two of these characters, in terms of character familiarity, the bot testing would have improved Rune Siren's situation regardless of anything else. That said, part of the reason why Brawly and Cell to some extent are chosen for this purpose is because they're actually hard to do the thing she's aiming to do against regardless of anything. In other words, this will work in terms of being calm and understanding the intention, but it may not help too much in terms of actually succeeding at it given the difficulty that these characters pose to it. However, another thing that the bot often helps with is recognizing which thing is easiest to do with each of your characters. For example, If you just find a particular bot really easy with character A, it means that if you need to use that strategy in a match, that's probably the character you want. Additional plans then become possible because you can build plans around the other characters in question, knowing what they can do to support, especially if you plan to play the whole match from a particular spot. But as noted, the problem is higher or more dangerous when it comes to the form of the bot that does offense, or rather your defense training. So it's still likely to show at least some difficulty in dealing with Cell and Steam. But we're already seeing at least some improvement in terms of dealing with Broly. There are at this time no iterations of the bot that help you work on focus or combos, however. So probably next week, you will be seeing more of this from her, with potentially more training having been done on either the offense or the defense side. For today though, her main issue was that, but it's now resolved. Once you've improved, you will often find that things that your opponent could react to before, or things they were able to spend time thinking about before, are no longer available to them. Meaning you're much more likely to land things like your Dragon Rush or certain types of pressure combo depending on which opponent type you're facing. Despite working on the design for the particular form of the bot we're releasing tomorrow, I have not actually trained against it personally at all. However, this team is, as noted, primarily about defense. And in fact, the third member of our routine for the defense, but isn't that different than Brawly in the sense that the long normals and the spacing is the problem? So I can just treat this as more or less the same thing.
また挑みに来たのかカスめ。邪魔をするな。
俺ならどうだ。
すぐに終わらせてやる。そこが。この程度で。そこは譲ってやる。
In terms of planning, I already know which characters are absolutely better at defense in these matchups. Frieza takes the cake by far. Not because of his zoning even, but simply because there's a certain spacing of his normals that the opponent is usually not expecting. The important thing about that is it's easy to keep him alive long enough because he doesn't tend to get hit by big setups. The opponent has to use a lot more meter to set up the same situation. Meaning that I really don't have to worry as much about Frieza taking relatively high damage, and therefore can just leave him in until the opponent's health reaches the point, the opponent's meter reaches the point where I worry about his health. As you can see, therefore, Frieza did take some damage, but not a whole lot. Similarly, Piccolo will face more or less the same situation. As Frieza is also the strongest character for actually executing the deflect into immediate hit, he is overall my strongest defense character. Piccolo is not necessarily weak on defense, but he is weak in that particular aspect of it. Fortunately, Piccolo doesn't have to deflect a lot of things. If I'm really sure it's coming, it's Piccolo. But it definitely looks like I need some time with my own bots. Unfortunately, that's unlikely to happen given that I need to spend so much more time developing them and checking the testing. Doing the testing myself does not lead to gathering enough information, so I'll get to them when they're perfected or when I know that everyone else has managed to get far enough to be able to help me.
It's time to face your opponent. Are you ready? Fight it out!
Perfect. I have no idea why he did that. Oh well.
Android もしもっと腕を上げることができたら、また相手になってやると言っておいてくれ。
これが元神の力ってやつか。あんた自身はあんまり神様らしくないけどね。
Being able to make your quick thinking decisions based on simply getting used to a situation more and more is the key of fighting games as a whole, and generally the thing that we feel good about. However, of course, we need to build up a skill to recognize these situations, or we're just stabbing in the dark And even though there will be improvement, it's often in ways that won't take us too far. Since many of the raw moves in this game don't lead into relatively big damage, certain characters can have real trouble maximizing their actual output. However, as always, we encourage you to work out how to get things started first. Once you understand that, at least to some extent, it's relatively easy to say, okay, I'm practicing this combo. If you find that the combo is situation dependent, all you have to do then is rotate through a couple of bots, see which situations they can create that break your combo, and either learn a new one or learn to recognize it so that you don't do it. One of the more interesting things that came up through watching the bot was the realization that in a lot of spaces in this game, there really is effectively no offense. Stand heavy will hit if your opponent decided to move, and it can be spaced so it is safe enough to just do, which can also be good, but it's not always worth it. If it does not hit, normally you've gotten nothing out of it at all. One useful aspect of this, however, is that it helps clarify when exactly assists need to be a thing. That very clear moment that we learn to recognize over time is also a moment where the opponent is very unlikely to be able to do anything about a raw assist, and chances are you are holding down back because neither of you knows exactly what to do. So between the down back, the stand heavy, deflect, and assist, you probably have a good set of ideas as to what you want done. There are many situations in which it would be better for you to get a combo started, or to get pressure started, than to do what I normally do and try to open up the opponent and then use the switch. Or simply you're on your last legs and have no assist anyway. But it's still just as useful. Recognizing that in that situation you have no offense means you can consider what else to make your opponent think about, backdash out, or back jump upward depending on the opposing team. The key, of course, is recognition. It's very difficult to get anywhere if you cannot recognize the situations in which you need to take or not take certain actions, even if it's hard to get yourself to do that at first. Our goal is always to make fighting games less mystifying, and rather than just explain it, to provide tools so that you can encounter this and work it out for yourself.
of this fight is anybody's guess. Ready? Let's go!
Therefore, it would be possible, at least, for Siren to use this team to test certain things, even though we are pretty sure that given the bot's methods of movement, the synergy between these three characters would not be as good as what you get with the Dark Gohan in Broly's slot. One thing that bots often do cause, though, that is a downside and you should definitely fight some players to reset it, is when we lose the tendency to use a tool that we already understood and were decently good at using. Because we got focused on either the fact that it doesn't work well with the bot situations required, i.e. is too easy, is too hard, doesn't help to lead into the parts where you want to get the points or whatever else. Or it caused our style to shift or change in such a way that using this move becomes less likely. Obviously, we've seen Moon Siren suffer a little bit from this, but she's picking it back up now. Gohan's elbow at particular timings and spacing. Kid Buu's Candy Beam. And Vegeta's Big Bang attack are all options that are not really used much in the bot training she was trying to deal with. With the obvious result of them getting out of her mind space for actual fighting. Reintegrating them is part of the fun of actually fighting though, since it's not as if you don't have skills, you just have different timings than you'd expect. But that's probably the end of her experience for the night, and we'll be switching as usual, given that we're at the halfway point of stream.
Brace yourself for the coming battle!
So the question here becomes, do we give Frieza the workhorse job or work on doing this with the other characters? Well, improvement is always the name of the game around here, so let's have Piccolo and 18 work out their specifics.
Get ready! Fight!
Cross blast. But with Broly out of the way, the situation hasn't really changed at all, given what the intention is. But the other part of the defensive game was learning when to backdash correctly. And part of that was realizing, you need specials when your opponent's stand medium covers a third of the screen. A general note, do not vanish to attempt to hit Piccolo out of special beam cannon, as the player can react to it by doing his instant movement. It's generally much better to use a beam or a long forward moving move, as it's unlikely that the player will go back, and even if they do, it's still guessing more or less 50-50.
Brace yourself for the coming battle.
However, if you have the meter and the presence of mind, being able to dash and then do such a move is among your better options. Still, your opponent can get out of this with more or less the same amount of effort, i.e. one reaction and one guess.
Ready? As you can see, with Omni Rabbit's amount of practice done on the combos that come out of the stand and crouch heavy, especially on Trunks, it's much more likely that there will be a lot of control and relatively large damage done in the parts of the match he's already focusing on. But at least part of this is having enough awareness to use it at the right times and having enough meter and said awareness of that meter.
to recognize how much damage you can get and when you should just go for something else. Fortunately, good defense in this game does build up quite a bit of meter, making it possible to stick around longer. It is for this reason that many of the bots do have specific requirements for your combos and cancels off of things, even though, for the most part, you generally don't want to be defeating the opposing character. This is, however, still useful in terms of training because you can use the number of points you've gotten otherwise as the marker. In other words, with the current way that the bots work, if you are at, let's say, 7 or 8 points, it no longer matters whether or not you confirm your big combos or sequences. Meaning that you get practice at that as well. So keeping your mind on the fact that now is the time to finish and now is not. Just Fine's practice has been primarily against the initial tests of the bot and the unconventional movement portion. Though she has spent some time fighting against the defense mode form and just general testing of many types. But since defense comes fairly naturally, as does a certain form of defensive awareness, the main thing that needed to be worked on was what happens when that awareness is failing you because your opponent's movement is outside of what you expect. Higher awareness of your character's ranges also always helps, as does being calmer in situations where your opponent does something risky that you normally learn probably from fighting either a lot of people or said bot. I could punish this or I could stop this if that was the thing I was expecting. Meaning that they can't use this tactic that much. You have a benchmark for how often you generally stop this move, and therefore how much your opponent had to distract you in order to make it not work. It also allows you to adapt in situations like this, where your opponent's movement has become their new way of dealing with your situation. But overall, you can apply the same thing to a totally different scene, which it would be the main point in this case. though the team used for dealing with unconventional movements is completely different by far. Understanding how to take them on leads to the same sort of thing. You can just more or less load up the bot with the same intention, just a different set of characters. This allows you to find the ways to counter the same forms of unconventional movement on that team, and often you should find it's easier. If you find it harder, then please let us know, because that means we could probably come up with something more useful. But that may of course also depend on your team. And we'd be glad to know that and add that to the page along with characters you normally play in order to help clarify for those out there who play that team.
Are you ready? Fight it out! 覚悟はいいか無駄だやられるかせせりゃ無駄ならどうだ覚悟はいいかさてなんだせりゃさてくそ受けてくれんだくらえ受けてくれ行くぞだやれやれ今度は中華もねここは許してやるちょっとみんなファイ今度は中華もねその程度ですか雑魚が後悔しますよなるほどほらその程度ですか
早く勝負をつけなきゃね。逃げたって逃げてもいいよ。だそら17号。
俺のエネルギーは永久に減らない。
17号。どうだ。いや17に勝たせてもらうよ。
今だ。これならどうだ。終わりだ。消えろ。そこだ。覚悟はいいか。バカンコー。無駄だ。それが焼けるな。覚悟はいいか。くらえ。無駄だ。ああ。そこだ。終わりだ。バカンコーだ。
こいつはどうだい。くらえ。
この程度か。
まだまだ。17のこいつはどうだい。くらえ。
楽しませてくれよ。
17号。
するな。
まだ。
どこだっちゃな。
行くよ17号。
わかったわかった。
今だ。ゴールをするぜ。邪魔だ。ちょっとゲーム終わりだ。
続きやんの？私を本気にさせて。まだ17に勝たせてもらうよ。
俺はそう簡単にはいかんぞ。
脅かしやがって。
加減が難しいんだよ。
貴様が
行くよ17号。
わかったわかった
じゃあねバイ
Additional awareness in defensive situations also helps you know when you can keep up pressure. In short, faster decision making is always a bonus, but it does take a lot of repetition and recognition of patterns in order to improve one's decision making.
It's all or nothing.
Most likely, now that we have the bots available or need to do bot development and therefore testing, you're more likely to see higher level play at least a little bit in these lounges. As mentioned before, we covered most of the main simpler things, and having seen what came out of that, use that information to finalize the bot setup. Overall, this means it's more likely that the team will spend at least a little more time playing this game, even if it is mostly just bots, and therefore, data we can get from them to pass on to anyone watching. Ooh, debated. If you have a team that requires you to learn multiple skills, it obviously will take a bit longer, bot or not, to figure out what you want to do. However, the general ability to decide which one you want to start with can still help a lot. Matches are where you gather that information and decide you're going for this or that. For those of you who have not seen our previous stream about which teams to use for which things, you can check our stream from last Friday, as it explains the 4 forms of the bots that we did release thus far. For the time being, you will have to find those links on our Twitter, but we will be updating the website more this weekend to provide more clarity and easier navigation. Finalizations to the mobile version will also be in the works. For example, it's relatively clear here that I should advise Justine to do her next bout of training with the bot we're releasing tomorrow, and therefore usually get more training on it and more testing time. Given that the relatively lacking response, especially on Vegeta so far, is tracking the opponent when Vegeta is in the air and deciding what to go for. This is particularly useful against opponents who don't convert well off their super dash in the air, or who just happen to not convert well because of Vegeta's animation. The bot super dash is just well often enough that that data could be obtained without actually having to fight a person, even though it would be very raw data and not useful for figuring out whether or not the person in question could have another solution. Still, overall checking it isn't so bad.
This should be a great fight! Ready? Fight!
Recognizing that you need to think of things in a certain way from the bots can also help you let go of certain situations in matches where you fail in one way or another. In other words, changing your own expectations. Being able to say, well, I know I lost that match because once I'm in the air I don't track my opponent well, is far different than thinking about some other aspect of it that, while important, is either not fixable or related to your opponent's flow rather than your own concept. So we're going with that. I need to improve my tracking and choices of opponents when they are on the ground or potentially going into the air, and I have just gone into the air myself. But we'll be seeing lots of that tomorrow. I expect to see more things involved, as Nappa is decent but not the greatest at this overall. Oh, that sort of thing, for example. That sort of thing is just something that happens. You don't think too much about it. But being able to frame the match in terms of, well, that's not the reason I lost. The reason I lost is my targeting. Can help in certain ways. It helps you keep your mind from becoming clouded and makes your decision making therefore stay consistent even if it doesn't specifically become better. Being able to identify consistency in your options matters just as much as the other options. Cell is also capable of launching good attacks from the air, in fact tons of them. But targeting is still a hard issue. And most of them don't do that much damage without a lot of awareness behind it. Meaning that when he's left as the only character on his team, recognizing what you need to do can be a little rough. But sometimes you just gotta put in that work. Which is a much more bearable concept when you understand what the work is.
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess.
Fortunately, this is a good interaction, or rather a neutral one, in that, as mentioned before, my characters don't have good ways of attacking that space that Just Fine's characters tend to occupy without a certain amount of shifting around. But they're also relatively hard to attack,
It's all or nothing.
and therefore one generally shouldn't, meaning that just not doing anything for a while is probably the better option.
ね。どこ見てんの。加減が難しい。や黙っときな。私を本気にさせたね。や黙っとき。やるね。まだ17の勝たせてもらうよ。
ほらふたかったね。その程度のしまったね。どうだ。どうだい。いますよ。出番ですよ。
やだほど知らず。まだ
そろそろ
や
この程度
まだ
そろそろおけばかやろ。
あんたの力が見たいわ。やまだ逃げたか逃げてもいいよ。そら17にかかせてもらうよ。くらえ
ボールをせるぜ。無駄だ。死になさい。出番ですよ。
行くよ17号。
分かった分かった。
じゃあねバイ。勝たせてもらうよ。くらえ吹っ飛べ。くそ
じゃあ少し
まだそら黙っときな。順調。この野郎。覚悟しろ。
今度はこっちからやらせてもらうよ。ちょっと脅す。ちょっとゲームをしようぜ。どうだい。なるほど。よし、その調子。貴様が相手後悔しますよ。ほら、そろそろ宇宙の次に行ってやる。今すぐ黙らせてやるぞ。この雑魚どもめ。
言ったろフリーザー。お前では私に勝つことはできないと。だからウォーミングアップだと言ったではないか。
Showdown is about to begin! Onegai Piccolo-san.
待たせた。
It's all or nothing. Go!
覚悟はいいか。
待てんぞ。バカな。シャドウバカな。ジッジッジッシェージッシェーヤシェーヤジッジッジッジッシェーヤ
生意気だよお前。その 調子許さんぞエリアなるほどその程度ですかないですよそろそろ死にたいだろ
Having long range normals helps you change the flow of your characters if you have enough awareness to figure out what to do with them. It also forces defensive players to be a lot more aware of your options.
ちょっと脅してやるかそこですか今度は死ぬかもねそこだ貴様ごとく出るのはわけなしそこそろそろ本気を出しましょうか見えた終わりだ
軽いね行くよ17号
わかったわかった。
なんだよじゃあねバイ
But sometimes you just have too many options.
これから見せるのが本当の力だやるねまだ生きた
そら
俺のエネルギーは永遠に減らない。無理なやつだ。
この星もろとも
恨むんならてめえの運命を恨むんだな。この俺のように。
We have been considering a setup of bot that has quote-unquote too many options. But it seems as closer to the same one we intend to do tomorrow, just with a different aim. So, we'll see.
Brace yourself for the coming battle!
Urori 生きていたのか
It's all or nothing! Go!
One strongly considered option is that once you have gotten used to a bot as a concept and can clear the challenge involved, you really can turn the health recovery back to normal. Or rather, turn the health recovery auto recovery back on, and then work on confirming all your combos in the same situation. But it is important to give yourself the mental stress before then of failing at different things. Depending on your ability to feel out the combo itself, and your confidence in it, you may also be able to lower the amount of times you have to land it or get the point, and simply make the requirement that you land the full combo. Feel free to let us know whatever works for you, and of course we'll be developing whatever works for us, though I expect it's going to be different by player, and therefore will most likely not be added directly to the bot pages as anything other than minor advice. Similarly, wherever we can, we have made sure to not require any use of DLC. However, there are definitely quite a few of our configurations where owning one or two DLC characters is drastically more helpful. Still, we are going to try some stuff tomorrow, as tomorrow technically relies at least somewhat on Broly, and he's a relatively difficult character to emulate in any other form. So we're going to see if we get any interesting interactions out of putting Nappa in that spot. Our disguising segments for Dragon Ball FighterZ bots are much more likely to be about demonstrating how to use them and the specifics of how you get your points, simply because, for the most part, you can explain whether or not they should have certain actions on or set to particular things really easily otherwise. As we get more and more advanced ones, we will be talking more about it, but still, given that the entire aspect of whether or not you need to put in anything or understand new inputs is unlikely to take up much of the streams, you'll get to see a lot more about specifics and different characters you can use to try it out. This of course means that there will be a bigger chance that we will miss at least some parts of it, or some good options. So we're more likely to at least mention it the week before, or so on, so that you can take a look at it and try out some things, and let us know if you found anything useful from the team config in question. In this case, that's only one night, i.e. go with either Broly, Piccolo, Gohan, or currently, if you do not have Broly, give it a try with Nappa, Piccolo, and King Gohan. With the general aim of jumping into the air and attacking them on their way in or defending yourself there. The additional fluidity of this type of match does make it actually a little harder to talk about. But now let's advise just going to at least try using Vegeta's air multi-blast, because this is really quite slow otherwise. And he does a lot of meaning from the move, so it's not as if you have to worry about it a lot. It's not like a massive amount, but it's certainly enough that it will stress out certain opponents. Cell is not as effective with his in many situations, but Cell has so many other options that the opponent is still likely to get hit with the Kamehameha anyway, simply because they have to deal with all these other things. And Vegeta doesn't have to worry as much about opponents spacing themselves in particular ways, given that he can just use his uppercut style. So them getting under him and him having to worry about that is a lot less easy. Predictive reads and awareness are only very different at low levels. Yes, that says at low levels. Predictive reads and high awareness start to mesh together at higher levels fairly quickly in fighting games, making it much more difficult for a player to say, I did that because I saw my opponent do this other thing. A lot of the time, even the player themselves are not sure whether or not they saw the thing or expected the thing, because they're just confirming their expectation. But this is a separate way of playing in itself.
Cell、俺に力を貸してどうするつもりだ。
So we're back to the aforementioned problems targeting in both directions.
覚悟はいいか。抜けてみろ。化け物め。くらえ。そろそろ。くらえ。だ。さて。ここは終わりだ。動け動け。覚悟はいいか。脅かしやがって。ふざけやがって。逃げられるか。
The chase is probably a bad decision on my part, though. It's very bad to get yourself into a position where your opponent has no reason to stop doing the thing. And even though you think you should be able to convince them, there's really nothing you have done or should do to convince them to do otherwise. This is one of the easiest ways to lose in an entitled fashion in a fighting game. And they generally mark a relatively inexperienced or poor player, because if they have experience they still have that reaction. It's usually that they're not very good.
Brace yourself for the coming battle! Ready?
行くぞとくそやってみせる何かそこかこの攻撃からごはんさん魔戦カメハメハカメハメハ突入は突入は邪魔だせよこれでどうだ俺様が行きますよこれが俺の全力ですフランス大丈夫かこれでも食らったいつ暴れしてやるかどうだこのままでは手伝えなんだとさあこれ
あんまりやって
いいとこチッそれ
ういまだまだよっスーパーサイヤ人の要領
いやこいつはどうか協力してもらおうしまった無駄だなんで違うそこかやってるやってやるバーリー許さんクリリンさん全体この私様が相手
大丈夫ですかよっよっ飛べなっぱり飛べ
調子に乗り上がってファイナル
大丈夫かなんの
これで終わりだ消えてなくなれ俺が俺の最高の技だ気に入らねえなって
治療の成果を見せてやる
さあこがやろう置けばやろ下ろせるぜ動きやろう邪魔だ置けばやろうせいぜい
どうだ
飛べ
なんだよどうだ
このベジータ様を死亡させるなよ
見えたはい
飛べオッケーどうだ
ここだ
よっ行くぞ欲しいなら覚悟しろ
行きますよベジータさん
ナッコ
戦いの感が鈍ってるな。クリリンさん、引退しても力は衰えていないな。僕も見習わなくちゃ。
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess! Ready? Fight it out!
邪魔をするな。ここに塗ってやる。無駄なこと。クズ効かんぞ。リストベックス。顔をするな。じゃあ少しだけ。クズ暴れした。俺も少しは役に立つかもしれない。そこだな。殺してやる。どこへ行くんだ。この程度か。終わりだ。何行くぞ。行くぞ。問題ない。無駄だ。任せろ。問題ない。チラシにならん。行くぞ。まだだ。逃がさん。終わりだ。せいぜい楽しませてくれよ。俺でも食らえ。動け動け。これで終わりだ。すぐに行くの技。甘いな。どこへ行くん。殺す。この程度か。もう終わりか。気
dedication to the reset results in the kill, and now it's really just a matter of worrying about how to get 3 cells attacks. Well, there's the meter for that. Cell type versatility makes this relatively hard to do, being the one with less meter, simply because you have to constantly worry about the vanish and other spacing tools. But eventually your own meter should build up. The question is, will it be enough? And that is part of the reason why Cell is placed in our defense spot, namely that you must deflect him twice in order to get the same result. That variation is what we use to make the player not simply deflect into move without at least thinking about the situation that they're in. But this of course does take quite a lot of practice, and even then it depends even further on which characters you are playing.
This should be a great fight! Ready? Fight!
私にバリーやる
絶対に許さんぞ。終わりだ。くらえ。終わりだ。無駄だ。終わりだ。なんだ。バカな。ここは譲ってやる。
早く勝負をつけなきゃね。しまった。やるね。まだまだ。そら行くよ17号。
わかったわかった。
こう見えても僕は優しい。この星もろとも貴様らを待つ。どうだい。この俺が
無駄だ。
その程度ですか。
早く勝負をつけなきゃね。
さて
笑えないよ。
では諸君、ごきげんよう。不意打ちでも狙っていたのか。残念だったな。
Time to begin the match! Are you ready? Go!
僕も加勢します。
スピードに自信があるんだ。受けてみろ。地球ごと消えてんだ。
修行の成果を見せてやる。
俺が殺してやる。どこへ行こう。
修行の成果を見せてやる。
楽しませてもらおうか。
うい
受けてみろ。カメハメハ。まだまだ。カメハメハ。どうしたエンゴス。どうしたこの程度か。なんだとマジだ。全体にこのそこまで。しまった。甘い。
どうした
あれを使うしかあるまい。
なんのしまった
エルズクラッシュ。問題ない。
うい
行くぞ。まだだ。しまった。こっちだ。行くぞ。
ちょっとやりすぎたかな。大人になって一緒に戦うなんてなんだか不思議な感じですね。
The battle's about to start. Good luck! Are you ready? Go!
この俺がお持ちになるとは無駄だ。テンゴスどうして人目邪魔だ。さっさと来い。させるか殲滅する。笑わせるぜ。見ろこの距離なら甘いな。せいぜい楽しませてくれよ。どうだ問題ない。行くぞ。どうだこの距離なら甘いな。せい行くぞ。終わりだ。そこがすぐに終わらせてやる。無駄だ。この程度当てます。スピードの自信があるんだ。さてと無駄だ。そこまで行くぞ。じゃあ少しだけ見えたぞ。ここは見切った。甘いな。いや無駄だ。問題だ。甘いな。殲滅する。身体のこのせいぜい楽しませてくれよ。さあこがおっと問題ない。行くぞ。ちょっとゲームをしようじゃないか。そこだな。てめえらなんかがこのナッパ様にかなうわけがない。少しはやるみてえだな。だが俺様に通用すると思うなよ。
Get ready for battle!
We're now moving into our last match of the night. If you're interested in any of the bot modes or similar things I've been mentioning so far, you can find them on our site 2-mk.org. But again, for the time being, you might want to go through our recent posts about the matter on Twitter from last week, which will still be visible at our account 2_mk_FEC, all caps. Anyone who has already had the experience with them could expect the release of the one I've been mentioning this weekend, and the appropriate disc guidance segment to explain its use and any minor issues that come up as a result of that tomorrow, Friday. As always, next week, Monday, we'll be having our mashing battle lounge for Street Fighter V. Which is our only winner stays on lounge, but usually tends to be fine. Generally for upper bronze and lower silver players. So you may get some matches with much higher rank opponents. So feel free to join us and record that at about the same time, 7 Eastern. Next Tuesday, we will as always have the Tuesday Train, our Guilty Gear lounge. It's still mostly beginners, moving into intermediate. Another loser stays on US East Coast lobby. Next Wednesday, we'll be continuing our Sandbag Casuals XL with another member of the team learning a little under night. We've done 2 weeks of that so far, 2 more to go. Chance of 3, but not a high chance. And of course, that would bring us back around to next Thursday for another Kame House lounge. When we will possibly once again take a look at whatever improvements the has managed to get based on any work they did with the bot or testing they did with it. So look forward to another tweet on Sunday around 6 or 7 Eastern, and the next bot release page, as well as some improvements to the pages we have released thus far. But with that said, and with that last blast from Krillin, this has been Rillian for Team TMK. Good night, everyone.
危ねえ油断しないように気をつけねえとな